The evening had begun to fall over the studio, covering the parking lot in a soft blue shade that usually signaled the end of a long shooting day. Yet something about today felt different to Sandra as she walked toward her car with her bag slung over her shoulder and her mind full of unfinished thoughts. She kept replaying small moments from the day, the way the scenes had needed more retakes than usual, the way the crew had grown tired, and how everyone had been moving slower as the hours passed. It had been the kind of day that drained even the strongest spirits, and she was more than ready to leave it behind and rest her mind. But something stopped her, something small but strong enough to pull her attention away from the door she had been about to open. Keanu's car was still in its spot, untouched, unmoving, quietly waiting in the deepening evening light. Sandra frowned with confusion because he had walked out earlier than her. She had even passed him near the hallway. He should have been long gone. And yet there it was, sitting silently, as if it had nowhere else to go. She felt the first spark of curiosity waking up inside her. Sandra turned around and looked back at the entrance of the studio. The place was nearly empty now, and the last few crew members were already chatting and laughing as they walked toward the far end of the lot. The studio's lights had begun switching off one by one, creating long, soft shadows that stretched across the floor like fading memories of a busy day. She stood still and listened for a moment, feeling the strange calm that filled the air. She did not know why she cared so much, but something in her heart pushed her to check. Maybe Keanu forgot something. Maybe he had come back for a script. Maybe he just wanted a quiet moment alone. She took a slow breath and walked back inside, letting the heavy door close behind her as the sound echoed through the empty hallway like a quiet reminder that she was stepping into something unexpected. As she moved deeper into the building, Sandra felt the temperature shift slightly and the silence grow thicker. There were no familiar voices, no footsteps, and no busy sounds that usually lived in every corner of the set. Everything felt paused as if the studio had taken a long, slow breath and had not decided to release it yet. Sandra walked quietly while her shoes made soft taps against the floor that seemed louder than they should have been. She followed her instinct, letting it guide her through the quiet corridors until she reached the main set room. The space was darker than usual, and the lights were dimmed except for one small work light shining weakly from the back corner. Sandra felt her heartbeat slow as curiosity mixed with something else that felt like faint worry. She took a few careful steps forward. The sound reached her before she saw anything. A soft scraping noise that echoed slightly in the large open room. It was faint but unmistakable, the kind of sound that did not belong in an empty studio. Sandra moved closer and finally saw a shadow bending over something near the back. She stopped instantly. Her breath held itself still. There was Keanu, crouched down with his sleeves rolled up and his hands busy working on a piece of equipment she recognized from earlier in the day. She watched him for a moment without speaking, surprised and confused. This was not something an actor was expected to do. It was not even something a senior crew member usually dealt with alone. Yet there he was, completely focused and unaware of anything else around him. Sandra stepped a little closer, her footsteps soft and careful. She studied his posture, the way his shoulders moved as he worked, and the calm, steady patience in his movements. There was no frustration in him, no sign of irritation, only a quiet determination she knew very well. Keanu had always been this way, always carrying a kind of gentle strength that rarely needed to be spoken out loud. Still, seeing him here alone, working like this long after everyone had left, stirred something deeper inside her. She wanted to speak, to ask him what he was doing, but she hesitated. She wanted to understand first. So she stayed hidden behind a tall, light stand and observed in silence. After a few minutes passed, something became clear. The equipment he was fixing was the same rig that had caused delays earlier. Sandra remembered how 2 junior crew members had seemed stressed and apologetic when it broke, fearing they would be blamed for slowing the schedule down. She also remembered the way Keanu had gently reassured them that mistakes happen and that no one was angry. Now she understood the truth. He had come back not for himself, but for them. He was trying to repair the equipment so the crew would not face trouble the next day. Sandra felt her chest tighten with emotion. There was something deeply grounding about this moment, something honest and quiet, something that revealed more about his heart than any conversation could. She slowly stepped out from behind the equipment stand and walked closer until she stood only a few steps away from him. Keanu finally noticed the soft crunch of her footsteps and lifted his head. His expression showed surprise for just a second before a small, gentle smile eased onto his face. He wiped some dust off his hands and stood up slowly as if he suddenly became shy about being caught doing something kind. Sandra felt a warm wave of respect for him. She could see how tired he was, she could see how much effort he had put in, and yet he said nothing about it. He simply waited for her to speak. Sandra asked him quietly why he had stayed behind. Keanu looked at the equipment beside him and then back at her with a calm, steady expression. He told her the crew had already worked too many hours today, and he did not want them to take the blame for something that was not fully their fault. He said he had some energy left and decided to fix it himself so the next day would start smoother. The simplicity in his voice made the moment even more powerful. He was not trying to impress anyone. He was not trying to be a hero. He was simply doing what he felt was right. And that sincerity wrapped the room in a deep emotional warmth that Sandra felt all the way to her core. She stood there quietly for a moment, letting his words sink into her. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of meaning and mutual understanding. She admired him in ways she could not fully describe. She admired his humility and his calm nature and the quiet dedication that spoke louder than any speech could. She knew many people in their industry who showed their best selves only when someone was watching. But Keanu was the opposite. His real strength was visible only when no one else was around. And that was the moment Sandra realized the night was far from over. Sandra stood quietly in front of Keanu, feeling the weight of the moment settle in the empty studio like a warm blanket of quiet meaning. The room felt larger than before, and yet somehow more personal, as if the shadows and soft light had gathered around them to listen. Keanu brushed some dust from his hands and looked almost embarrassed that she had found him alone working like this. She could see a faint tiredness in his eyes, but behind it was a calm, steady courage that made her feel strangely grounded. She asked him gently how long he had been there, and he answered in a soft voice that he had returned shortly after she walked out. He said he did not want anyone to wake up stressed and worried about a broken rig. He wanted the next morning to feel clean and free of blame. Sandra felt her heart tug quietly inside her chest. There was a rare honesty in everything he did, and it made her pause to absorb what she was witnessing. The air around them grew still, and the faint humming sound of a distant generator became the only background noise. She found herself studying his face and noticing the small details she often overlooked in the busyness of set life. The gentle lines near his eyes that came from years of kindness and empathy. The calmness in his expression that never felt forced. The quiet strength that made him feel safe to be around even when he said nothing at all. She stepped closer and felt a small wave of warmth rise in her chest. She asked softly if anyone knew he was doing this, and he shook his head while giving a simple smile. He said it did not matter who knew because he was not doing it for attention. He said good work lived in silence and that the right choices did not need an audience. Sandra felt a soft sigh escape her as she realized he lived by these words every day without ever needing to explain them. She looked down at the equipment he had been fixing and remembered how nervous the young crew members had been earlier. She imagined their relief tomorrow when they arrived and found everything working perfectly. They would think the problem resolved itself, or maybe that someone from the technical team handled it. They would never guess that Keanu had stayed behind silently just to protect their peace. This thought made Sandra's chest ache with admiration, but also curiosity. She wondered if this was something he had done before. She wondered how many times she had walked out thinking the day was over while he stayed behind to clean up a mess he never caused. The more she thought about it, the more she felt a soft, blooming respect that grew deeper than she expected. Keanu bent down again and checked a final adjustment on the rig as Sandra watched him with growing interest. She asked if he needed help, but he gently shook his head and said it was almost done. She could hear the subtle pride in his voice, not the kind that wanted praise, but the quiet fulfillment of someone who finished what needed to be done. Sandra felt a strange pull to stay near him. She felt that leaving now would be too cold and too distant after seeing the sincerity of his actions. So she stepped closer and placed a hand lightly on the equipment frame, as if joining the moment even without doing anything significant. Keanu looked up at her, and she noticed the soft, grateful smile he gave. It was small but meaningful, and something about it eased the tiredness she had been carrying all day. A gentle silence settled between them, the kind that did not weigh heavy, but instead felt safe and comforting. Sandra slowly sat on one of the wooden crates nearby and watched him continue his work. The small work light cast a warm glow on the side of his face, making the moment look almost cinematic, but real in a way that touched her spirit. She asked him if days like this ever exhausted him, and he paused for a moment before answering. He said exhaustion came from doing things that went against the heart, but when he did something that felt right even if it was difficult, it did not drain him. Sandra listened carefully to his words, letting each one sink deeper. It was rare to hear someone speak with such gentle truth. It made her wonder how many people understood the quiet strength he carried. As she sat there watching him, she felt something shift inside her. She realized how often people misjudge dedication by looking only at the visible efforts, the ones in front of cameras, the ones in meetings, the ones that came with applause. But the real dedication often happened in the places no one saw, in the moments no one recorded, in the hours when the world assumed you were resting. She felt a tightening around her heart as she understood that Keanu's greatest strength was not his talent or his reputation, but his unwavering commitment to kindness, even when it went unnoticed. This realization made her see him in a deeper way, and she felt a wave of admiration she could not hide. When Keanu finally stood up and wiped the last bit of dust from his hands, he stepped back and checked the equipment one more time. He nodded with quiet satisfaction. Sandra rose from the crate and approached him with a soft smile forming on her face. He told her it was fixed, and she felt a sudden warmth settle inside her chest. She thanked him, though she knew he would brush it off, and he did. He gave a small shrug and said it was nothing, but to her it was not nothing. It was a moment that revealed the truth of his character. It was a moment that told her more about him than any conversation had ever done. She took a slow step closer and told him everyone deserved to work with someone like him, someone who cared deeply even when no one was watching, someone who put the well-being of others before his own comfort, someone who stayed behind after the world had gone home. Keanu looked down for a moment, as if receiving her words with humbleness before lifting his eyes again. He said he just wanted the next day to start right. He said they all worked hard, and he did not want anyone to feel blamed or worried. Sandra felt her eyes soften as she looked at him. The studio lights flickered far above them, and the room felt warmer now, as if the night itself was quietly listening to their exchange. A gentle feeling settled between them, almost like a silent promise of deeper understanding. Sandra felt grateful for coming back instead of driving away. She realized she was witnessing a side of Keanu that many would never see, a side filled with sincerity, humility, and quiet dedication. And in that moment, she sensed that the night was beginning to unfold into something far more meaningful than she expected. The night inside the studio grew deeper, and still as Sandra and Keanu stood near the repaired equipment, and in that moment, she felt something shift in the air, as if another layer of truth was waiting beneath the silence. She noticed that Keanu kept glancing at the rig with a thoughtful expression, as though something about it still troubled him. His eyes carried a quiet concern that she had not fully noticed earlier. The more she observed him, the more she sensed that he had not simply stayed behind to fix a broken piece of machinery. She felt something heavier resting beneath his calm exterior, something unspoken yet undeniably present. She stepped a little closer, trying to understand what he was holding in his silence. Keanu looked around the large empty set, as if checking the room for hidden echoes or unseen eyes, and then sank slowly onto one of the wooden crates near the wall. The soft scrape of wood against the floor was the only sound for a moment. Sandra watched him closely and felt a small ache in her heart because his shoulders looked slightly heavier than before, not from the physical work, but from something emotional he had kept quietly inside. She sat beside him and waited, giving him the space to speak if he wanted. She had learned over the years that Keanu never pushed his feelings into the world. He let them surface only when the moment felt safe and real. Tonight the studio felt like such a moment. Finally, he exhaled slowly and began to speak in a low, steady voice, one that carried a hint of vulnerability that caught Sandra's full attention. He told her that earlier in the day, when the equipment had failed, he had overheard a few tired crew members expressing worry that they might lose their position if the issue happened again. He explained that the studio was under pressure, and the smallest mistake tended to fall on the people with the least power. He said he could not stop thinking about their fear even after he left. He said it stayed with him like a quiet weight that he could not ignore. Sandra felt her breath slow as she listened. She could tell his words were not just about the equipment, but about something much deeper inside him. He continued speaking with a calm honesty that made the moment feel heavier and more intimate. He said he had seen too many people lose their jobs over small accidents that were never their fault. He said he knew what it felt like to watch someone carry fear silently while pretending to be fine. He said he had lived through moments where kindness would have made everything easier, yet no one had stepped forward. Sandra felt her chest tighten as she listened, because she could sense the truth in every word. He was not talking only about today. He was remembering something personal, some experience that had shaped him long before she arrived on this set. She felt a wave of respect rising through her, deep and steady, because this quiet honesty was something he rarely shared aloud. The silence grew warm between them, and Sandra gently turned toward him, wanting to understand more. She asked him softly why he had never mentioned these thoughts before, and Keanu gave a small, tired smile. He said he did not think his feelings needed to be said out loud because he was not doing anything special. He said helping others should not be treated like something unusual. He said people deserved support without needing to ask for it. His voice held no anger, just a deep, calm sadness mixed with strength. Sandra felt the weight of his words settle heavily in her mind because it revealed something important about him, something she had sensed for years but never heard him say directly. He carried the world with gentleness even when life had not always been gentle with him. Sandra could no longer stop herself from asking the question building inside her. She leaned slightly forward and quietly asked him what memory he had been thinking about earlier, the one that made him return to the studio to protect the crew. Keanu paused for a moment as if searching through the shadows of his own past, and then he slowly began to explain. He told her about a job he once had long before his acting career began, a job where mistakes were not forgiven and where people were treated like tools instead of human beings. He said he remembered a day when a coworker had been blamed for something he did not do and how that blame had cost the man his job. He said he had wanted to speak up, but he had been young and afraid and unsure of his place in the world. He said that moment stayed with him like a quiet echo, and he never wanted anyone around him to feel that same helplessness again. Sandra felt a ripple of emotion pass through her chest as his words painted a picture of the young version of him, struggling with fear and responsibility and regret. She understood now why he acted the way he did. She understood the reason behind his kindness and his quiet dedication. She knew this story was not something he shared easily. He carried it like a private lesson etched deeply into his heart, guiding him through the choices he made every day. She felt honored that he had trusted her enough to share it tonight. She reached out and placed her hand gently on his arm, offering silent comfort without needing to speak. The studio felt warmer now, filled with a quiet emotional light that seemed to rise from the truth he had shared. Sandra told him softly that he was not the same person he had been back then, and that his regret from the past had turned into strength. She said the kindness he showed every day was proof that he had grown far beyond that moment. Keanu listened quietly and then gave a small, reflective nod. He said he believed people were shaped by what they had seen and what they wished they had done differently. He said his only goal was to never repeat the silence he once had. He said if he could prevent fear in someone else even in small ways, then he felt he had done something meaningful. Sandra felt a slow, deep admiration grow in her chest as she looked at him. She realized there was far more to his dedication than she had understood. He was not just hardworking. He was not just humble. He was carrying a purpose that guided every quiet choice he made. She looked around the empty studio and felt grateful to be there in this moment, listening to him open his heart in a way that was rare and precious. The flickering work light cast soft shadows around them and made the room feel like a sanctuary where honesty could finally rest. She took a deep, steady breath and told him she wished more people understood the depth of his heart. She said the world saw him as kind and calm, but few knew how deeply he cared and how quietly he protected those around him. Keanu looked down with a shy expression as if he did not know how to accept such words. He said he did not need the world to understand him. He said he only needed to do what he felt was right. The simplicity of his words touched her more than she expected. She felt a slow warmth spread through her chest that made her smile without realizing. There was something else moving beneath the moment, something unspoken yet undeniable. Sandra sensed it and felt herself drawn closer to him, not physically but emotionally. She realized she was beginning to see him in a deeper light, not as a coworker or a friend, but as someone whose heart carried a rare sincerity she could not ignore. She wondered if this night would become a turning point in their story, a moment where their bond grew into something she had never expected. But she pushed the thought aside gently, knowing the night still held more to reveal. The studio felt calmer now as Sandra and Keanu sat together in the soft glow of the work light, yet something inside her sensed that the night was far from finished. She could feel a quiet tension beneath their silence, not the kind that caused fear, but the kind that suggested another truth was waiting to surface. Keanu seemed peaceful yet distant, as though his thoughts were still walking through the memories he had shared. Sandra watched him carefully, noticing the way his fingers brushed against the crate he sat on and the way his eyes wandered toward the empty corners of the room. She felt a warm pull in her chest, a desire to understand the parts of him he kept hidden even from himself. She shifted slightly, leaning a little closer, hoping he would speak again. Keanu finally lifted his head and met her eyes with a softness that made her heart beat slow for a moment. He told her he had one more thing he needed to check before they left, something that had been on his mind all day. Sandra rose with him without question, feeling a quiet seriousness in his tone. He grabbed the small work light and carried it to the far side of the set where a row of props and mechanical pieces were stored. Sandra followed close behind, her footsteps echoing gently through the empty room. She felt the atmosphere change as they walked deeper into the shadows. The silence grew thicker, almost suspenseful, like the walls were holding stories that had never been spoken aloud. When they reached the corner, Keanu placed the light down and knelt beside another piece of equipment. Sandra recognized it instantly. It was the prop mechanism that had accidentally malfunctioned during one of their earlier scenes. She remembered how it had caused a sudden loud jolt that startled everyone on set. She also remembered the way a young assistant had looked terrified afterward, afraid she would be blamed for not checking it properly. Sandra watched Keanu pull out a small toolkit he had brought from somewhere and begin inspecting the parts with careful precision. She felt a soft ache in her chest because she knew exactly why he was doing it. He wanted to make sure that assistant did not walk into another day filled with fear. Sandra stepped closer and asked quietly if something was wrong. Keanu hesitated before answering, his voice low and thoughtful. He said he had noticed a strange vibration in the mechanism earlier and feared it might cause another malfunction if left unchecked. He said he could not risk someone getting hurt or someone being blamed unfairly. He said he wanted to fix it now while everything was calm. Sandra felt her breath catch slightly. She realized he had been carrying this concern silently all day, thinking about it even while performing his scenes, even while smiling for the cameras, even while everyone else believed the problem had been solved. She understood now why his eyes had looked heavier earlier. He had been holding more responsibility than anyone else realized. Sandra bent down beside him and watched his hands move steadily as he opened the device with careful patience. The soft click of the screws and the faint hum of the work light created a rhythm that felt strangely soothing. She asked him why he had not told anyone about this concern earlier. Keanu gave a gentle smile and said he did not want to create unnecessary worry unless he was sure. He said people had enough stress already, and he preferred to solve what he could quietly before adding more noise to the day. Sandra felt a slow wave of emotion rise through her. She admired his heart and his sense of responsibility, yet she also felt something else. She felt protective of him, wishing he did not have to carry so much alone. She reached out and placed a hand lightly on his arm, letting him know without words that he did not need to handle everything by himself. Keanu paused for a moment and looked at her, surprised by the warmth in her touch. Something in his expression softened deeply, like a hidden door opening inside him. He lowered his gaze for a moment and whispered that he sometimes forgot he did not have to do everything alone. Sandra felt her chest tighten at his quiet confession. She told him gently that he was allowed to lean on others, that he deserved support just as much as anyone else on set. He listened to her words slowly, and she saw a small shift in his eyes, as though her presence brought him a comfort he had not expected. When he returned his focus to the mechanism, Sandra stayed beside him, handing him tools when he needed them and watching carefully. She understood now that her presence mattered, not because he needed help fixing the machine, but because he needed someone who understood his heart. The room around them felt different, filled with a deeper connection that neither of them had planned for. The air carried a quiet tenderness mixed with a growing sense of trust. Sandra sensed that their bond was being strengthened in ways neither of them fully understood yet. As the minutes passed, Keanu finally discovered the issue. A small internal piece had loosened, something that could easily cause another loud malfunction if left alone. He corrected it with steady hands, ensuring it was secured properly. Sandra watched his focus with admiration. He was gentle with everything he touched, yet strong in the way he moved. When he finished, he let out a slow, tired breath and closed the mechanism with the same care he had used to open it. He stood up and stretched his back slightly, clearly exhausted from the long day. Sandra rose with him, feeling the same heaviness, but also a strange kind of hopefulness that warmed her chest. They walked slowly away from the corner of the set and back toward the open space where they had been sitting earlier. Sandra felt the need to say something more than just simple gratitude. She wanted him to know that he mattered, not just for what he did, but for who he was. She turned toward him and spoke softly, telling him that his dedication meant more than he believed. She said his kindness shaped the way people worked around him even when they did not realize it. She said he brought calmness to stressful moments and integrity to difficult days. Keanu listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful and touched. He said he did not often hear such things, and he thanked her quietly. They reached the center of the studio where the soft light from the ceiling touched their faces. The silence grew warm again, filled with unspoken meaning. Sandra looked at him and realized the night had brought them closer in ways she had not expected. She felt safe with him, not because of what he did, but because of who he was underneath all the layers. She saw a man who carried his past with courage, who protected others without needing recognition, who stayed behind when the world went home. Her heart felt full. Keanu took a slow breath and looked around the nearly dark studio. He said they should head out soon before the building fully shut down for the night. Sandra nodded gently, yet she felt a small sadness because she did not want the moment to end. She wished the night would stay just a little longer so she could hold on to the feeling of closeness they had shared. Still, she picked up her bag and walked with him toward the hallway. The soft echo of their footsteps felt different now. It felt like the beginning of something meaningful, something that would not be left behind in the dark. As Keanu and Sandra walked down the long hallway toward the exit, the studio lights above them flickered softly, creating a gentle rhythm that echoed their slow, steady steps. Sandra felt the night wrapping around them like a quiet blanket, and every step she took beside him made her heart feel heavier yet calmer at the same time. She sensed something important was still waiting to unfold, something neither of them had spoken yet, but both of them felt leaning quietly between them. Keanu walked with his usual calm posture, but she noticed a faint tiredness in the way his shoulders moved, a weight that came not from physical work, but from carrying responsibility far longer than most people ever would. Sandra walked a little closer to him, and the silence between them felt warm rather than empty. When they reached the glass door near the exit, Sandra noticed something strange. Keanu suddenly slowed down his steps and came to a full stop, his eyes focused on a small window overlooking a dim section of the studio yard. His face grew thoughtful, almost distant, like he had seen something only he understood. Sandra followed his gaze and saw nothing unusual outside. Just shadows, soft lights, and a few forgotten props stacked in the far corner. She turned back to him and asked gently if something was wrong. Keanu hesitated for a moment before answering, and in that hesitation, Sandra felt a new wave of suspense rising in the air. He finally spoke in a quiet voice that carried a hint of worry. He told her he had remembered something important, a detail from earlier in the day that he had pushed aside because of the chaos, but now realized he could not ignore. Sandra watched him carefully as he explained how one of the junior crew members had mentioned feeling unsafe about a specific part of the set, something about a loose hinge on a tall lighting structure. He had planned to check it after the last scene, but the equipment malfunction earlier had distracted everyone, and the day had ended too quickly. Now he feared that if the hinge was truly unstable, it could put someone in danger the next morning. Sandra felt her stomach tighten. She knew how heavy equipment could fall without warning, and even a small mistake could cause serious damage. Without waiting any longer, Keanu turned around and began walking back into the studio with quiet urgency. Sandra followed immediately without needing him to ask. The hallway that felt warm a moment ago now felt colder and filled with suspense. She could see the change in Keanu's expression. He was no longer simply being careful or dedicated. He looked deeply concerned, focused, and aware of the possible risk. She admired the way he switched into action so quickly, not out of fear, but out of instinct to protect. She felt a rush of respect for him as she kept pace beside him. When they re-entered the main set room, the space felt even darker than before. Most of the overhead lights were off now, leaving only a few dim bulbs along the walls. Keanu moved toward the large lighting structure at the far end of the room, guided by memory rather than sight. Sandra felt a chill run down her arms as she followed him into the shadows. The stillness of the room mixed with the suspense of the moment created a quiet tension that pressed against her chest. She watched Keanu shine the work light upward toward the tall metal frame. His face tightened. Even without touching it, he could see the hinge was slightly out of alignment. He reached up and tested the metal with a careful pull. The hinge moved more than it should have. Sandra felt her breath catch. If someone had climbed the ladder attached to the frame tomorrow morning, the entire structure might have shifted dangerously. Keanu looked down at her with a mixture of relief and concern. Relief that he had remembered it tonight and concern over what could have happened. Sandra stepped closer and placed her hand gently on the lower part of the frame to steady it while he inspected the top. Her heart beat faster now, not out of fear, but out of the intensity of the moment. She admired how he acted without hesitation, guided purely by care for others. He worked with patient urgency as he tightened the hinge, checking and rechecking to make sure it was secure. Sandra held the structure steady and felt the tension in her muscles grow. The silence around them became almost sacred, filled with purpose and meaning. She realized they were not just fixing equipment. They were preventing a possible accident, protecting someone they might never know, ensuring the next day began safely. She felt herself filled with a deep emotional warmth at the thought that kindness could take a form as simple and powerful as this. After a few minutes, Keanu stepped down and tested the hinge again. This time it held firm. He let out a slow breath that carried both exhaustion and relief. Sandra felt the tension in her shoulders release. She looked at him and saw a soft brightness in his eyes, the kind that appeared only when someone had done something meaningful. He brushed some dust from his hands and gave a small, grateful nod toward her. He told her gently that he was glad she stayed with him. He said he had not planned for her to help, but her presence had made the moment lighter. Sandra felt a soft warmth bloom in her chest at his words. She told him that he did not have to face everything alone, that even strong people needed someone to stand beside them. Her voice was soft but filled with meaning. Keanu looked at her with a quiet, thoughtful expression she had rarely seen from him. It was gentle, sincere, and heavy with emotion he kept buried most of the time. She felt her breath slow as she met his eyes. The air between them grew still and charged. There was something unspoken lingering between them, something neither of them dared to name yet, but both felt deeply. They walked back toward the center of the room, their steps slower this time. The work light threw long shadows behind them, and the night felt softer now that the danger had passed. Sandra felt the urge to tell him something she had been holding inside, something that rose to her throat with surprising strength. She told him he had changed the entire night with his dedication. She said he had protected people who might never know what he did. She said his heart carried a rare strength that many people talked about but very few truly lived. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words were steady. Keanu listened quietly, and she saw the way his expression softened deeper than before. He told her that he did not think of his actions as heroic or special. He said he simply could not ignore things that felt wrong. He said he had learned over the years that silent effort often made the biggest difference. Sandra felt her heart swell with admiration. She knew he meant every word. He did not help for praise or recognition. He helped because he cared, because he believed in doing the right thing even when no one saw it. As they walked toward the hallway again, Sandra sensed a new closeness between them, something fragile yet strong, something built through trust and sincerity. She felt grateful for every moment of this unexpected night. She realized she had discovered a deeper part of who he was, and it made her see him with a quiet tenderness she could not deny. Keanu glanced at her with a soft smile, and she felt her heart respond in a way that surprised her. Something inside her whispered that the night still had one more twist waiting to unfold. The hallway felt different this time as Sandra and Keanu walked toward the exit for the second time that night. The usual coldness of the studio walls seemed softer, and the silence no longer felt empty. Instead, it carried a gentle warmth, shaped by everything they had shared and everything they had learned about each other. Sandra felt her heart beating in a slow, steady rhythm as she walked beside him. It was a rhythm filled with admiration, with understanding, and with something deeper that she had not fully allowed herself to name. Keanu walked quietly, his steps calm but heavy with the long night behind him. Yet there was a softness in his posture now, as if the emotional weight he carried had eased because someone had finally seen it. As they reached the final door leading outside, Sandra paused for a moment and looked around the darkened studio. The place that had felt cold and overwhelming earlier now felt meaningful. It felt like the walls had watched them grow closer, like the shadows had listened to the truths he had shared, like the set itself had transformed into a space of quiet honesty. She turned toward Keanu and noticed he was staring at the large, empty room too, his expression thoughtful and calm. The faint glow from the hallway lights painted soft highlights around his face. She felt the air grow still as she watched him, sensing that he was gathering his thoughts before speaking. Keanu finally shifted his gaze to her and gave a small, tired smile. He told her he appreciated that she stayed with him tonight, that she chose to walk back into the studio when she could have easily gone home. He said her presence had made the long night feel less heavy and more meaningful. Sandra felt her chest warm at his words. She took a step closer, wanting him to understand the depth of her feelings. She told him quietly that she had not stayed because she felt obligated. She stayed because she wanted to. She stayed because she saw how much he cared, how much responsibility he carried, and she could not let him face the night alone. Her voice carried emotion she could no longer hide. He listened with a quiet intensity, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them. She could feel that he was moved by her words even if he did not say it out loud. She knew him well enough to understand that his silence often carried more meaning than speech. She watched him inhale slowly as if gathering courage to say something he had kept inside. Then he spoke in a low, gentle voice, telling her that he was not used to people staying for him. He said he had learned to handle things alone and that he did not expect anyone to notice when he struggled or when he chose to help others quietly. He said having her by his side tonight felt different in a way he was still trying to understand. Sandra felt her heart ache with emotion. She could feel the honesty in his words, fragile and real. The air between them grew heavier yet softer at the same time. Sandra stepped closer until she was standing inches away from him. She could see the tiredness in his eyes mixed with something deeply sincere. She took a gentle breath and told him he did not have to be alone in his acts of kindness. She said he deserved someone who understood him, someone who appreciated his silent dedication, someone who saw the depth of his heart without needing him to explain it. She did not know if she said too much, but she did not regret it. The night had created a space where truth felt safe, and she did not want to hide her feelings anymore. Keanu looked at her for a long, quiet moment, the kind of moment that carried emotion like soft waves, slow and steady. Then he lifted his hand gently, hesitating for a heartbeat before placing it on her shoulder. The touch was light, respectful, tender. He told her she had shown him more understanding tonight than many people had shown him in years. He said he did not know how to thank her for that. Sandra felt a deep warmth spread through her chest. She placed her hand softly over his, letting the connection settle naturally. She told him he did not need to thank her. She said he had already done something far greater without realizing it. He tilted his head slightly in quiet question, and she continued speaking. She told him that his dedication tonight had reminded her of the importance of kindness, not the loud kind, but the quiet, steady kind that changes lives without asking for anything in return. She told him that watching him protect the crew, fix the equipment, and act without seeking recognition had inspired her more than he knew. Her voice trembled slightly as she said it, but every word came straight from her heart. Keanu listened with full attention, and she could see the emotion building gently in his eyes. They stood there for a moment, wrapped in silence that carried gratitude, respect, and a quiet bond built through shared truth. The outside light flickered faintly through the door window, reminding them the night was nearly over. Keanu finally lowered his hand from her shoulder, but not before giving it a gentle squeeze. He smiled softly, a smile that revealed appreciation and something deeper, something warm and unspoken. He said they should head out before the building locked automatically for the night. Sandra nodded, but she felt her heart linger on the moment they had just shared. They stepped outside into the cool night air. The parking lot was calm and empty, touched by the faint glow of streetlights reflecting on the ground. Sandra breathed in the fresh air and felt the heaviness of the studio fade, replaced by a sense of peace. Keanu walked beside her toward their cars, yet neither of them wanted to break the quiet connection they had formed. The night felt alive with meaning. As they reached her car, Sandra turned to him and said quietly that she hoped he knew how much she respected him. Not because he stayed late or because he fixed things, but because of the person he was when no one was watching. Keanu looked at her with a gentle expression that revealed deep emotion behind his calm posture. He thanked her softly, and his voice carried the warmth of someone who rarely let his heart show, but chose to let it rise tonight. He told her she had seen the real part of him, the part he usually kept hidden. He said her presence reminded him that kindness was not just something he gave to others, but something he deserved to receive too. Sandra felt her eyes soften as she listened. She told him she would always be there when he needed support. The sincerity in her voice made him pause, as though the message touched him deeper than she expected. They stood quietly under the soft streetlight glow, both aware the night had become something they could never forget. It had been filled with hard work, unexpected discoveries, honesty, and shared vulnerability. But most of all, it had been filled with kindness and respect that shaped a new connection between them. The night that began with worry ended with trust. The night that started with equipment and exhaustion ended with understanding and quiet closeness. Keanu gave her one last warm smile before walking to his car. He opened the door, paused, and looked back at her. He said she had made the night meaningful just by being there. She told him he had made it meaningful by being himself. Their eyes met one last time, carrying everything unspoken between them, and then the engines started softly in the empty lot. As Sandra drove away, she felt something new in her chest. Not heavy, not confusing, but bright, something like admiration shaped by tenderness, something like respect shaped by hope. She knew the night had changed the way she saw him, She also knew this was only the beginning of a deeper journey between them.